Ahoy lads, Sam here, bringing you a video about internet connection for online gaming. I'm going to talk about what constitutes a good or a bad internet connection. I will also discuss ways you may improve your current internet connection or what sort of services you should look for that would be better. One thing you will hear often is that wired connections are better than wireless connections. And that's mostly true. But why is that so? Well, wireless connections have higher latency and do have a much higher risk of packet loss. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. You will see two different types of wireless connections or Wi-Fi. There's 2.4 gigahertz, which is mostly used in older technology. It does reach further, but it is slower and it's more easily disrupted by things like your microwave or say a lot of metal in the walls or floors. The other type is a 5 gigahertz connection, which is much faster, and that's used by more modern devices, but it has less range. I want to talk about what makes the difference between a good internet connection and a bad one, because it's not just as simple as having a wired connection. There's plenty of issues you may still have in a wired connection, and your connection does not end at the Ethernet port to your router. What constitutes a bad internet connection would be high ping or packet loss. Packet loss is when you send out packets to the internet, or the internet is sending packets to you, they get lost somewhere. And this can result from several things, but in general, the reason why you would have packet loss is because you have a jittery connection. Well, what is jitter? Jitter is when your connection quality changes drastically and often quite rapidly. I will put on screen an example of a good test and an example of a bad test. Now, in a good test, you're going to have a very consistent connection where you'll see the jitter is small. There will always be some variation because that's just how it is. But the less of that, the better. When there's a lot of variation, it means that you're going to have more jitter and thus more packet loss. When packets are lost, it means information isn't getting to you. Information is being lost. Now, your router can attempt to guess what some of that information is because that's what it can do. It can predict what some of the packets are, but as far as online gaming goes, a lot of that information cannot be filled in by your router. So the information that gets lost is just simply not communicated. So if you're playing a game like Dark Souls and you're fighting somebody who has packet loss, you will see them skip animations or sometimes stop animating entirely. The reason for that is the information, which is the packet that contains the attack animation or whatever it was that that player was doing, is lost. Now, some of the easier packets to come through that are the first ones are like movement, because you're pretty much always going to see how somebody is moving. That information almost always comes in because the packets are earlier and smaller. Without getting into too much detail, that's why certain things are more likely to be lost than others. But you get the general idea of when you have packet loss, things aren't communicated, and then it starts looking weird. And if you have packet loss, other people may look strange to you, where they start doing things and you're missing the information, so they jump around in your game. Now let's talk about latency, which is a lot more simple. Latency occurs when you are further away from the destination. So let's say you have Wi-Fi, but you're pretty far away from the router. Even if your connection is good and you don't have packet loss or much packet loss, your ping might still be higher. The lowest ping achievable for me in my online connections is higher than it would be if I was on a wired connection because the information would travel faster. However, when you play with people who are further away in the world, or there isn't good routing between your router and their router, you will see higher ping. If I play with somebody and I'm from, Western Europe and they are from Brazil, we are going to have high ping because we are far away from each other, and the internet tubes that connect us aren't as good as they are to other parts of the world, and certainly not as good to other parts of Europe. What high latency translates to in an online game is you will be behind. The higher the latency, the further behind you are at seeing the actions that happen. So if somebody attacks me in Dark Souls, I'm not seeing it for some time. If you're playing a shooter game and somebody shoots you, you're not going to be able to react to that in time. If you ever get killed when you run around a corner in a shooter game, that's usually due to latency because you've already rounded the corner on your screen but not on their screen, so the time it takes for that information to travel is longer. I want to briefly talk about routers and the different types of Wi-Fi or internet connection they may offer. If you are on Wi-Fi, you want to look for the type of Wi-Fi it is offering. You will see things like AC or G connection, or C, or Wi-Fi 6. Now, they used to label them all by letters, and then somewhere along the line they decided that was a bad idea. So the newest one, as of this video, I believe, is Wi-Fi 6. So that is the best type that you can get. AC is followed shortly behind that. That would be like Wi-Fi 5. Anything older than that, I do not recommend. It's not going to be as high of a quality of connection. So I only would recommend that you get AC or Wi-Fi 6. When it comes to a wired connection, you want to be looking at the max speed of the router. Now, it may not be able to achieve that full max speed. Don't feel like you're leaving something on the table if you're not using the max speed. You definitely want it to be higher than the maximum speed of your internet connection. I want to start to talk about things that you can do to improve your connection, especially if you're having a bad internet connection as is. Now, one of the simplest things you can do is log into your router. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, if you own a wireless router, there is probably a way that you may log into it, like if you have a Linksys or a Netgear or a TP-Link or some kind of mainstream router like that, there's going to be a way to log in. Now, I cannot cover every single router and how you would log into them. Routerlogin.net, TP-Link, TP-Link modem.net. Linksys, you would type in 192.168.1.1. Some routers it might be .1.0. Just look it up online and find out which one is right for you. You will find a login screen where there will be a set of credentials that you need to enter. Now, the default for a lot of these is admin for the username and then admin for the password, or it may be admin username and password for password, admin username, no password. It may be set to something. You'll have to figure that out again on your own. You can Google what the default one is. It may have been set to something, and if you don't know it, then you will have to reset your router in order to log in. Anyway, once you actually get to logging in, then you're probably going to want to look for some advanced settings, typically under the wireless section. So like for me, I'm on the TP-Link. I go to wireless. Well, this doesn't give me a lot of options, but there's this advanced tab, and you're going to start to see a lot of options in here. Now, we could talk about everything available in here for a long time, but one of the big things you want to look for is quality of service, QoS. And if you go into there, you're going to see things like, oh, you can set a rule list. So your router has to decide what's important in its traffic, and this can help it decide what is most important. Another thing I want to mention about routers is when you look up routers and you see things like dual band, that's going to mean that there is a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi connection and a 2.4 gigahertz connection. If you see something tri-band, it's going to mean that there's two 5 gigahertz connections and one 2.4 connection. If you're looking at whole home Wi-Fi systems, or a mesh network. They may be tri-band, but one of those is going to be used for simply communicating between the routers. Another thing I should say while we're talking about this, if you do not have wireless range to reach your system, do not buy a repeater. I will say that again, do not buy a wireless repeater. They are worthless. And I will quickly summarize why. They have to take that signal and repeat it back to your system and then back to the router, and it is constantly taking up one of those slots on the router. It doesn't have its own dedicated slot, and the speed is always going to be at least half. They're riddled with issues and packet loss. I'll put it this way. I've never heard of somebody pleased with a wireless repeater. It hasn't happened to me yet. I do not recommend them. What I recommend, if you need more range, is either to upgrade the router or seriously consider a whole home Wi-Fi solution or a mesh network. Look up the Netgear Orbi or a similar system. All right, so I'm here on a quality of service list. High priority. All right, I probably want to add in my computer in there, right? And okay, I've got an option to scan. You might just have a list of devices. But oh gee, well, I don't know which one is mine. Well, on your computer here, for something like a console, it'll be probably pretty obvious, or a phone, but for desktops it can be kind of tricky sometimes. So there's some IP addresses listed there, and we can find that out what your IP is by opening the command prompt, running it as an administrator, and typing in ipconfig. And when this whole list comes up, you want to look for your IPv4 address. So at the end here, we are 103. So 103. We want to add that in. Save. There we go. Now I'm on the high priority list. And that right there can improve your connection quite a bit, especially when you have a lot of devices connected to the router. Other settings that may be really helpful while you're in here. You can look at port forwarding if you're having issues, especially with like NAT type on console and stuff like that. You can look up the online ports for the games or Xbox Live, PlayStation Network, and you can open those ports. There's also UPnP. That is also a good idea to turn that on if it's not already on. Port forwarding may also be called port triggering. You just go in here and again look up those ports that you might want to open, and look up whether they're TCP or UDP or both, and put in those ports if for some reason your router might be blocking certain connections. Usually that's not a problem. You'll need to do this sort of thing more often when you're, say, hosting a game server, opening ports that you normally wouldn't. In short, ports are used to communicate these packets, but routers only open ones that are normally used by normal services. And if you're hosting something like a game server, it's using a different port than may ever normally be used, so that port is just blocked by default. The last thing I want to talk about that you can change in your wireless settings is something called the channel. Normally you want to just leave this set to auto, but in short, if you're in an area where there are a lot of wireless routers, like say an apartment building, there's only so many channels that routers can talk on. So let's say two routers are on the exact same channel and their coverage overlaps. Devices can get confused on who to communicate with, or they fight with each other over the connection, the two routers. In that case, you might want to take something like a Wi-Fi analyzer app on your phone and see what channels are being taken up. Otherwise, you could just try changing the channels until you get one where your connection is more stable. This would be more likely the case if you're just suddenly dropping connection from your router, but it's something that could improve the quality of your connection regardless, so I thought I should mention it. Now let's talk about things that could be wrong other than just your device, your connection to your modem and router. Now your modem and router do two different tasks. You may have an all-in-one unit. a modem takes the signal, like actual internet signal, and changes it to ones and zeros and back. It modulates and demodulates. Your router simply makes your wireless signal available and routes internet traffic. If you're having internet connection problems and you have a wired connection or you have a very good Wi-Fi connection, but you can't figure out why you're having problems, it could be due to faulty hardware. It could be due to bad wiring, like actual cabling inside of your home. It could be outside of your home. So when your device connects to your router and modem, then that's going to go to an inlet into your home. Then it's going to go out of your home, and perhaps it's underground cabling, or perhaps it comes from an aerial wire. There could be an issue there. There could be an issue at there could be an issue in your local area at one of the nodes. There could be an issue in between you and whatever you're trying to connect to. So sometimes it's hard to figure out where the issue exactly is. Obviously, the first thing you should do is restart your device and your modem and router if you're having issues. That can clear up traffic that is stuck in the router. It could clear up errors that are happening on the modem. Another thing you want to do is log into your router and see if there's a firmware update for your router. Sometimes there can be issues by not updating your firmware, especially security issues. Beyond that, you should check what your internet service is. So if you do a speed test and your internet speed is slow, there's download, and that's you downloading information from the online web. There's upload, and that's you uploading information to the web, that's fine to be slower. It's more important that that's faster if you do things like, well, upload YouTube videos. And then there's your ping, of course, but we already talked about what that is. Last thing I'm going to go over quickly is your internet connection that is being provided to you by your service provider, and how your internet connection is affected by things past your modem and router. So if you're having issues with your internet connection, first thing you should do is restart your device, your router, and your modem. If you're still having issues, you should try moving closer to your router or replacing your Ethernet cable. If you're still having issues then you should consider replacing your router and modem, but it may be worthwhile for you to contact your internet service provider and have them send a technician to your home. I used to be a cable technician, and if you are sent a quality technician, they should find out where the issue is at. If it is not your modem or router, then it could be an issue with the internet service provider, the ISP's node, or their network as a whole. Modems and routers do go bad after a few years, so replacing them is going to have to happen. There could be something wrong with the cabling in your home, especially if your home was built in, say, the 1970s or 80s. There could be a bad splitter, which splits internet signal between different outlets in the home. Similarly, an amplifier does the same thing, but it tries to split the signal without a loss in overall signal. Those go bad and need to be replaced. It could be a fitting, it could be the outlet itself. When it's something like that, you're going to need an electrician to replace it, unless you are going to do the work yourself. And that is the worst case scenario. It's unlikely that that is the problem unless you live in a very old home, and even then it still is unlikely. But those issues, like a bad splitter and whatnot, could happen in a newer home as well, and they cause many problems with signal, lots of packet loss. That's everything I had for you lads in this video. Please feel free to check out my other videos. I plan on starting some new series, and if you are not subscribed to the channel, I really need some people to subscribe to the channel because I'm getting a lot of views, but I'm not getting a lot of subscribers, so I guess you guys know what that means. So thank you everybody so much for watching, and have a good one.